Hello, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in, listening, and/or watching another episode of the Stivers Show. Very excited about my guest today, Michael Monteforte with Monteforte Law up in cold Boston right now.
Uh,
What's going on, Mike? How are you, man?
two fresh inches on the ground, my friend. So
That's
I'm jealous seeing out the window behind you today and seeing a little bit of sun because it'll be 2 more months before we see it again here. So
that's brutal. That's brutal, man. Well, I won't rub it in, but we've got a chilly 75. So, but good to have you on the show. I know I was just on your show last week or sometime recently. I don't, time is can't tell what day of week it is. But anyways, so we met not too long ago at a conference, and I know you do a lot of estate planning, and we just kind of hit it off because I know you've got a lot of clients who want to get out of that snowy weather up in Boston and move down here, Florida, either part-time, full-time, retire here, and then they end up dying here. So that's kind of that's full circle. But so we'll talk. I want to talk a little bit about what you do and how what you kind of suggest to your clients who are thinking about making that change. But maybe where we start, I always kind of like to talk a little bit about who you are and what you do, how you got into it.
sure. And yeah, thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it. Thanks for being on with me a couple of weeks ago as
Yeah.
well. That's great. So, as you said, what I do is estate planning and elder law. That's what I focus on. My entire practice is built around those two areas of practice. So I do everything from complex wills and trusts to elder planning, Medicaid planning, long-term care planning. So my office, as you said, is we're just outside of Boston, probably about 10 minutes down the highway from Boston. I'm licensed here in Mass. I'm licensed in New York. I just put in for my licensing in New Hampshire. But when it
It's a lot of
comes to
CLE credits to
yeah,
maintain.
absolutely. But when it comes to like you said, lots of clients that we have here that are part-time in Mass, part-time in Florida. It's a whole different animal having clients with property there that's got its own special set of rules and circumstances, which is why I'm happy that I have you to rely on for that stuff because they're just very different sets of rules the way you guys do things in Florida versus the way we do them here in Boston. And lots of times I've got clients that are just in both arenas. So like I said, we're about 10 minutes out of the city. We're in Woburn, Mass. I've got a solo attorney firm. I've got 4 employees on staff, but I'm the only lawyer, at least for this year. That may be changing sometime in 2021. We're thinking about potentially adding another attorney to the firm, but for right now, it's just me, and then I've got 4 support staff with me as well.
So do you care to share kind of your background, how you got into it, why you chose this area of law?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. When I first started out, like most people, I went to work for a firm, happened to be a small firm. I worked there for a while, 5 or 6 years, and I kind of maxed out there, and they were paying me everything they could pay me, and it got to the point where I decided I was going to go out on my own. I opened up an office in Wilmington, Mass, which is where I live. And at that time, I was whatever walked in the door, that's what I was doing. Whatever somebody called and asked about, hey, do you do this type of law? Yeah, oh, yeah, sure, I'm great at that. And meanwhile, I'd be running to the shelf, reading books and trying to figure out, what I was doing. So, I was general practice for a while. I always had an interest in the estate planning and drafting side of things. I like the technical part of the drafting, but it was always a part of everything else that I was doing. I was doing lots of real estate work, lots of business work, and then has to be maybe 5 years ago now. My grandparents were they were at the point where they were selling their home to move into an assisted living facility. My grandfather was showing some signs of dementia. And my family was looking to me, I'm the only lawyer in the family, saying, what do we do? They had, paid off their home. They had amassed some savings over their lifetime of work. And my family was trying to figure out, is there any way that, what they've acquired can be protected, or are we going to end up paying everything to, an assisted living facility? And they looked at me for the answer, and I didn't know what it was. And I just said, I don't know. I have no idea. Let me try and figure this out. And at that point, I dove into estate planning and elder planning. I took every class. I read every book, every website, every possible seminar, to really try and learn this stuff and become as expert in it as I could. And I realized, that I enjoyed the work. I realized that there was a need for it, and that I really could, build my practice around it. The other thing I figured out is that in order to do this stuff, you really have to specialize in it and eliminate lots of other areas of practice, because it changes so frequently that in order to be good at it, I'm constantly still going to continuing ed and seminars and things like that, because the rules are in a state of flux at all times. And the only way you can really kind of know what you're doing with this stuff is to focus on it and deal with it exclusively. So that's what I do now.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because a lot of people, and how that kind of segues into how we work together, is that a lot of people, I don't think, realize that the laws are so well, it depends on the state, but in a lot of states, they are just very, very different, right? And so what might work here in Florida would not fly in Massachusetts. So you being, now hopefully licensed in, I think, 3 states, how is that, are you having to just like constantly study, update yourself with all the changes in each 3? Or they're since it's Northeast, it's kind of similar?
Well, that's part of it. So with New York and New Hampshire, Massachusetts has what's called reciprocal jurisdiction there, which means we are able to practice there once we get a certain number of years of experience. We don't have to take a separate bar exam, because the laws are very similar. They might not be exactly the same, and there are some nuances to New Hampshire and New York versus Massachusetts, but it's not as wildly different as it would be for many other states. So yes, I do attend tons of continuing ed, sure, but it's not as varied as really having to spend my time doing 3 different states worth of education, because there's so much overlap. But in lots of states such as California and where you are in Florida, the differences are, in my opinion, they're just too many. And so if I was trying to do what you do in Florida and what I do here, I would be in class all the time, because there are lots of differences between the 2 states, to the point where I said, okay, I need to stay in my own lane. I know what I'm good at, and stick with it, and then have somebody that's good at what they do in Florida, which is again why I'm glad I have you, because there's just too many differences for me to stay on top of both at the same time.
Yeah, and do you have, so I know you probably do, but do you have, maybe more or less 1 ideal, 2 ideal types of clients, or the type of clients that you work with, just to kind of give those listening, an idea of who because I think estate planning is such a broad topic. We really need to use a better term for it when we're speaking to the general public, because and maybe you have one. I don't really have one, but a lot of, I don't think people know what a will is, or they have an idea of a will, and then they have an idea of like what a trust is, but they think trust is just for people with, millions and billions of dollars stored offshore. But apart from that, it's such a just broad topic that I'm wondering if you've got kind of narrowed down, like, hey, these are the people that, general idea, the type of people we work with.
Sure. And you're right. It's such a broadly focused term when you say estate planning or estate plan, or who needs a will and who doesn't need a will. And believe me, I give out advice at times for people that don't necessarily need a will because of their family situation or their asset situation. So, at my office, we work typically with 2 different types of clients. Anybody from, our clients tend to be in their 40s and 50s. They don't have to be married with kids, but it seems to be who we see the most of. At that point in their lives, they've acquired some assets. Lots of times it might be limited to real estate and a retirement account, or maybe real estate, a retirement account, and an investment account. But they've acquired enough assets where, here in Massachusetts, we have an estate tax, and where, the estate tax might get to affect them. So I don't deal as much with, for example, very, very young families or people just starting out, they tend to need a simpler plan than something that I provide. And so I have colleagues that take care of that. But when we get into folks that need a little bit more of the technical side of planning, especially when it comes to things like avoiding estate taxes or protecting their real estate through trusts and that sort of thing, that's where I come in. The other side of things, which is the elder law planning part of my practice, sometimes I see clients that are just retired, maybe mid 60s or 70s, or I've got clients that are in their 70s and 80s, and it might be them that are coming to see me or their adult children that are coming to see me to talk about long-term care, either for themselves or for one of their parents, and looking for ways to protect their assets. Because here in Mass anyway, long-term care is astronomically expensive. I think we were #2 in the nation last year, second behind Alaska, I think it was. Wouldn't surprise me if we're first this year with the expense of long-term care. So we come in and help clients, again, whether it's a 70 or 80-year-old or maybe their 40 or 50-year-old kids, help them protect their assets, especially their home. Lots of clients that age have paid off their house, and it's the biggest asset that they have, and potentially retirement plans or other assets. And we're looking for ways to try and insulate those assets from long-term care costs and hopefully pass them down to the next generation. So that's a big part of what I do, is helping people plan for and pay for long-term care.
So that passed down to their children or the retirement, that kind of ties in nicely to the Florida home, right? Because that's, kind of a goal for a lot of people, I think, or they want to have a place to come down. So do you see a lot of that? You see a lot of people, do they come to you saying, hey, I want to purchase this home, how's that going to affect my estate tax? Or is it after the fact and now, hey, we bought this house, what do we do?
Sure. We see it both ways. Sometimes it's an existing client that's here in Massachusetts that'll say, okay, we're starting to get a little tired of the winters. We'd like to make an investment of a property down in Florida and spend the winters there. But we want to make sure if something happens to us, it stays in the family. It goes to our kids or other family members. And then sometimes it's clients that come in to see me for the very first time to do planning, and I'll start, kind of getting into things, and they'll say, oh, by the way, I have a condo down in Clearwater or Sarasota. I say, okay, hang on here. That plays into this because, lots of times, again, they're looking to pass the property down to the family, keep it in the family. Sometimes we use trusts and things to do that. But because of the differences between the states, lots of times at that point, that's when I'll bring in, say, somebody like you and say, all right, here's what we're thinking about doing. How's that going to play, with your rules when it comes to, real estate owned by trust and things like that, so that, we're making sure we're getting input on both sides and we're doing the right things.
So what happens if they don't, because I know we can maybe talk a little bit about probate, which is really our forte, and I know you do, I think you do a little bit of that as well, but what happens if they've got that home in Florida, and how does that come into play if there's probate in Massachusetts, or does that affect it at all?
Sure. So yeah, it absolutely affects it. So here in Massachusetts, if we apply to probate court to do an estate for somebody that's passed on, the Massachusetts court has jurisdiction over property that they have in Massachusetts. And if we get somebody appointed as the executor for an estate, here in Mass, we call it personal representative. We're not allowed to call it executor anymore. But when we get somebody appointed, most states that border with us, New Hampshire or other New England states, will recognize that appointment, naming someone as executor, so that even if I get them appointed here in Mass, I can go to New Hampshire court and deal with, real estate that they've got in New Hampshire or in New York or someplace else in New England. But Florida is very, very different. They don't, grab onto our probate process that we've already done here. They make us do this separate process in the probate court. And even just the way they look at assets and wills, for example, are very, very different. I had a client that passed away. They had a condo here in Mass and a condo in Florida. And the way that they had drafted their will was not something that the Massachusetts court would recognize. And so I had to probate the estate here in Mass as if there was no will. But the Florida court did recognize it as a valid will. So I had to have it, that will probated in Florida, and in Massachusetts did the probate as if there was no will at all. So, two different states looking at the same exact document and interpreting it, very, very differently. The process for either keeping a real estate in the family or selling it, if that's what the family decides to do, just very, very different. And, we need to have somebody that's expert in Florida probate in order to handle that part from us, because of the way that the courts interpret things there and the way real estate's handled.
I'd be curious because, I mean, probate in general is stressful for most people because they've just lost a loved one. But I would imagine on that side of things, if it's your client, or maybe not your client, but someone's passed away and their kids, everybody's living in Massachusetts, and now they've got to figure out, what do we do with this property in Florida? And they might not be in the position to pay the mortgage, to pay the association fees. I would imagine they come to you, and it's a pretty stressful situation for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that happens a lot. Sometimes we've got situations where it might be a parent that's passed and I'm dealing with, their adult kids, but they don't even know whether there was a mortgage on this place, or what the bills are, or where they are, or how they were being paid. That's why it's important whenever someone comes in to see me about probate and they've got property here and there, I make sure that, we've got to bring in a Florida expert right away, because, again, it's stressful. We've got situations where we don't know if condo fees are being paid, or association fees, or mortgage or real estate taxes, and things like that. So it's important to, loop in, someone from Florida right away that can check the title, can tell what's there, whose name is the property in? Is it in the name of a trust, or was it in mom and dad's name? And are there any outstanding mortgages of record? So, yes, the whole thing can be a stressful process. We try to take as much of that off of, the client's shoulders as possible, handle everything with the court so that they can deal with, grieving and deal with the family. But when it comes to, again, whether we're keeping a real estate or we're selling it, whatever the case may be, it's important that we are getting the necessary experts sooner rather than later, so that we're not scrambling and having to deal with foreclosures and things like that.
Yeah, so it can be a messy world, but it can also be, relatively straightforward as well if people, take the time, plan, and first know about it. Because I think that's one of the main things that you and I have spoken about. It's a lot of times they don't even know. A lot of times they just think, oh, I did this in Massachusetts, so I'm covered in Florida, or hey, I did this in Florida, so I'm covered in Massachusetts, even though that's we know probably not correct. So, well, I know we're coming up on our time, and I appreciate you, kind of sharing all that with us. Is there anything, maybe recommendations or advice you would have for maybe someone who's got assets in two different states? What would be their first step, and then I guess how they can, get in contact with you and learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the biggest piece of advice that I give people is that you've got to hire an expert, and you've got to listen to that expert. Even if that expert isn't me, you've got to hire somebody that knows what they're doing and listen to their advice. The analogy I use a lot of the time, and my staff here laugh at me about it, is I say, I don't tell the plumber how to fix my pipes. I let them do what they do. The same thing applies. You've got to hire an expert. Anybody here in Massachusetts that knows what they're doing is going to be able to give advice with regard to probate here in Mass. And again, because we've got so many snowbirds, like we call them, folks with property here and in Florida, we've got to have contacts down in your state to be able to help us with this stuff as well. The other thing is, when we meet with clients for the first time and we're trying to get a handle on their assets, it's important that, you tell your attorney everything that you have, because sometimes they'll pop in later as an afterthought, and I'm working through, documents, and they'll say, by the way, we have a condo in Florida. And I needed to know that, right out of the gate instead of 3 weeks in. So, you have to be upfront about your assets. You have to recognize that something that is covered in one state might not be covered or looked at the same way in another. And, you got to get an expert on your side and listen to that expert.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, man. Well, Mike, you're an expert in your field, and if someone either here or there needs to get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So absolutely. So calling the office tends to be the easiest way. We're 978-657-7437. One of my staff will answer the phone, and they're a lot smarter than me. They just tell me what to do and I do it. So they schedule all the appointments and tell me where to go. So that's the best way to start. Our website's full of free information. I've written a couple of books that are available free on the website. It's just montefortelaw.com. It's another just good source of info and a way to get in touch with us.
Awesome, Mike. Appreciate it, sir. Always a pleasure speaking with you, and try to stay warm up there, man. We'll see you soon.
All right, buddy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care.